Hello, my name is Peter Cinnamon, and you're very welcome to a podcast which is all about the Irish League. Linfield are your League Cup champions for 2026, and they did it the Linfield way. Resolute, organised, and perhaps lacking a little bit of firepower, but they won't care as they poured another bucket of cold water on what had been an ascended Glentoran season this year. But another penalty, more heartbreak. Were the Glens just unlucky, or did they come up short once again when it counts? From elevation to despair, and a battle at the bottom which capped off weeks of momentum shifting. How close now are Glenavon away from maybe kneeling down top flight football out of nowhere again for next season? And can anything stop this Crusaders free fall? Fix up, look sharp, it's time for another weekly edition of Kick and Match. A big week actually in Irish League football calls for, well, rather big podcast and a debut to boot for all those who say that I'm merely a scud and that I only bring people on to wallow in their misery. Here's a turn up for the books. First timer, great to welcome on to the podcast, former Linfield general manager. Hello, David Graham.
Pleasure to be on. This is my second podcast of the day. I was in a Rangers one earlier, so if I get paid for these, I could call myself a professional podcaster. But
I even saw you on TalkSport as well the other week.
I have to say I went out on loan to Jim White there last Monday, but wasn't the same as Stephen Noel.
So, the day after the afternoon before, it was a very happy Mother's Day if you were someone from the blue side of the city. After what has been touted as a season of discontent, of frustration, you've ended up with a trophy.
Well, look, in reality, I think, and this isn't verbatim, but you tweeted last night words to the effect of, how did Glentoran lose that? Dominated the game, best player on the pitch, then gives away a penalty, last virtually kick of the game, and pretty much Linfield's game plan worked, and that in itself is really the entire podcast summed up in a couple of sentences. I have to say, I mean, being a Glentoran fan must be incredibly frustrating because, anyone that I spoke to, I spoke to Stuart Dallas a couple of times during the week because he was doing the cool comms for, I think, Sky, and I was just talking through, and actually when I sat down and looked at the Glentoran squad, I would have almost gone as far to say that, bar the goalkeeper, the vast majority of the Glentoran bench would start for Linfield. But I think if there's one thing in Irish League football you never do is you never write off Linfield and you never write off David Healy. And I'm personally delighted for David. I consider him a friend, and I know the challenges that he's faced. I've seen them when I've been inside the tent. I know the level of expectation, which is at times incredibly disproportionate. It's a cliche conceding a corner at Windsor Park's a little bit like conceding a goal, such as the sort of the scrutiny and the intensity of the fan base. If nothing else this season, David has gone another year winning a trophy, and hopefully, from a certainly Linfield point of view, it's a momentum builder for the running.
On the David Healy question and his chapter of this story, just how he reacted after the game, it felt like this was some form of catharsis. He needed this after the way their season has been over the past few months.
Yeah, well, look, I always think when you look at, David Healy and now how long he's been at Linfield and the amount of success that he's brought, and look, I've said this publicly several times now, I don't think David Healy will ever get the credit he deserves at Linfield, probably whilst he's at Linfield. And I think if and when David moves on, and Linfield, if they end up, starting the managerial merry-go-round, which pretty much every other club almost in sort of European world football now does, sort of Linfield fans will realise, the standard that David has set. And I think for David Healy, and I've always said, and look, and you know this himself, I'm not putting him in the same bracket as, Walter Smith or Sir Alex Ferguson. But what I would say about those two managers, who for me were two of the greatest managers to ever, certainly in European football, they got the absolute best out of average teams. And I think, again, even yesterday, with respect to the Linfield team, on paper, it was nowhere near as strong as Glentoran. But again, David was able to get the absolute best out of them. He has won titles with teams who, uh, I mean, without being too harsh, I wouldn't say maybe they weren't good enough to win titles, but they certainly weren't the strongest squad in the league when he's won them. And ultimately, I think yesterday, David, given all the pressure he's under, and I think, and listen, again, I've been public about this, given the environment that he's had to work in and the challenges internally, he just continues to get success. And, for me, it's the testament to both the man personally and professionally.
From your view, why do you not think he gets the kudos, he gets the credit from the Linfield fans currently?
Well, I think probably in a way, if you speak to David Jeffrey now, David Jeffrey probably never got the credit he deserved either. And I think that probably stems from, when you grow up on a diet of success, you can almost become sort of intoxicated by that success, and therefore you lose a level of perspective. And I think I can say that, being a Linfield supporter, where Linfield are just expected to win everything. And I know at any club, there's a sense of like, well, everyone wants to win, everyone wants to win everything. But I mean, I recall a story where, and it's a former board member now, quite audibly in a boardroom during the probably late 2000s. And I think he probably knew David Healy could hear him. He basically said words to the effect of, three doubles in 4 years or whatever the statistic was isn't bad, which, was really testament where it's a challenge, isn't it? Because the culture that you want to set at any club is that, if you're not first, you're last. But in the same sentence, that then comes with an immense amount of pressure. And I think now, to answer your question very bluntly, given the context of the Irish League in terms of the ownership models of other clubs, in terms of the money being spent, other clubs, I mean, how much football has changed, David Healy has been able to maintain success at Linfield when, like, quite frankly, Linfield haven't changed at all. In fact, Linfield are almost resistant to change. Yet David Healy has been able to still garner success in amongst the challenges that he faces.
Well then, and promise it's not going to be a David Healy podcast. We've done many of them, but just from your perspective on this, if we were to just slice off all those previous years, and I know you don't do that, but if we can try to make it a vacuum of this season, as a fan, you must look at this team and go, look, based on maybe a VAR choice or the way the ball bobbled, this could have been a very different result that we're now reviewing. But you're forgetting yesterday's result as well. You have to admit, this has not been a stellar season. Fans have complained about the style of football, and perhaps last summer's transfer window has not particularly set them up for long-term success. This is a team that looks to be set for a rebuild, and does some of that not have to be at David Healy's door?
Well, look, here's reality, and I said it during the game yesterday. I said, this game where Linfield are crying out for Joel Cooper. Now, look, it is a very easy narrative now to say, and it's a fact. Let's look at when you're saying that. Let's go right back to January, where Linfield allowed Joel Cooper to leave, and Joel Cooper's been in record as to the reasons why. So Joel Cooper's left. Joel Cooper is probably the best player to play in the Irish League over the last 20 years, arguably, maybe more.
Bold.
Now, now, they then replaced Joel Cooper with Callum Morrison at a significant outlay, and Kieran Offord. Now, Morrison, for whatever reason, didn't work, and sometimes transfers
Absolutely.
don't. So it was essentially a very expensive mistake. And Kieran Offord has had, no luck with injuries. He started like, a steam train, and then I suppose in many ways that train has come off the tracks. So therefore, I suppose the two kind of big outlays either haven't worked for one reason or another. Morrison's already gone, and Offord's been injured quite a bit. So therefore, if you actually look at it, Linfield are in a much, much weaker position. So I think it's, if you're looking just at this season, I know I'm slightly veering away from your question, but if you look at it only this season, it is very, very difficult to give a fair judgment when, if we're honest, and you're talking about the style of football maybe hasn't been great for a long time, and maybe it's never been great. Whatever, that's anyone's, that's up to interpretation. It's subjective. But what I would say is that when you had a match winner like Joel Cooper, he was able to do, quite frankly, very little to nothing throughout a game, and then come up with a winner. That is essentially the difference. That's the difference at a lot of big clubs where they have that one player, that that sort of the more expensive signing, if you want to call it, that is able to drag. I mean, a little bit like probably City and Holland, where when Holland's been going through a rich vein of form, it's probably papered over cracks, and then when he is not in as rich a form as before, maybe those sort of cracks begin to appear. So the same as at Linfield. So I think it's really difficult for me to sum up the David Healy piece here, Peter. I and it's strange to say, I really want David Healy to really, I suppose, do what the likes of Stephen Robinson's done. I think David Healy is equally as capable a manager. I think there's absolutely no doubt the likes of the St Mirren job he should be in for, whether he is or not. Look, that's entirely up to him. I know that, Linfield obviously is his boyhood club. Obviously, his family are settled in Northern Ireland, and I think he sort of said quite openly that, he can't see himself ever managing another club in Northern Ireland that isn't Linfield. But, for me, I've always felt, because of his legendary status, that David Healy should be Northern Ireland manager one day. Now, whether that comes to fruition or not, I certainly think he needs to give himself the best chances possible to get into that space. And I think it's a harsh reality, but it's going to be very difficult to go from the likes of Linfield to the Northern Ireland job.
Let's then focus on that final, where when you're talking about Cooper, if there was one player that looked the most Cooper-esque, it was one player who used to wear the blue of Linfield, and that was Jordan Stewart. And you opened this podcast by giving your old pal Pete a pat in the back, saying that I summarised how this went, and I very much felt as though, from a game plan point of view, Linfield did exactly what they needed to do. They did not want this game to get into a shootout. They were able to shut down that first half, kind of lean into the atmosphere of the game. I thought Glentoran also themselves showed off that they had the far superior attacking talent, maybe just didn't have that composure, and they missed some chances. But as the game crept on, as Glentoran tried to throw men forward, it was, of course, one big mistake that VAR almost could have wiped away. And the unlikely hero of Chris McKee is the man that's given the ball after Kamsa Kamara gives away the foul late into second half injury time. And McKee scores the goal, 1-0. Glentoran don't really have an answer, and everybody's celebrating at Windsor Park. Could you have seen any other route to victory for the Blues?
No, look, I think that, Linfield, you're right in terms of firepower for Glentoran. Like, anybody that I spoke to is just like saying about Hoban, how I'm impressed I've been with Hoban this season. How he really, and some of the other signings Glentoran have made, clearly are signing them with a view to, trying to win the league. So, from a Linfield point of view, there hasn't been anyone. And, when you're brought up on Spike Ferguson, and obviously, Martin McGahey, who I was too young to remember, Glenn Ferguson, Peter Thompson, Andy Waterworth. Linfield have always had a striker who scored a lot of goals, season in, season out. Fitzy's not that type of striker. I think he brings a lot to the table. But I think in terms of firepower in front of goal, that's probably where Linfield have struggled this season. Probably for me, if Linfield were going to get anything out of the game, it probably would have been a set piece. And ultimately, it was a set piece rather than a corner or free kick. It was a penalty. But yeah, look, in reality, there's a couple of really good chances. I think Jordan Stewart should have scored maybe two, maybe even three times. And I mean, there was no real time, if I'm honest, where the Glentoran goalkeeper was was even stretched, bar obviously, and
I'd
the
agree.
great irony was that I think that probably the best player on the pitch was the player that gave away the penalty.
I thought so. I mean, he's not long for this league as he's young. He took a while to get his footing in there, and he's exactly what you want in this archetypal centre back. He's young, he's quick, he's physical, and then unfortunately, just positioning's off. The ball gets played in, and he has to dive in. And look, he's unlucky. I think you can look at different angles there. You can maybe claim that it wasn't a penalty. I think when you see it properly, no matter what, he may have got the ball, but he clipped the player as well.
Yeah, look at it. Actually, well, obviously it went to VAR from the point of view of VAR would have checked it, but it wasn't obviously an on-field review. I when I saw it wasn't, and I had a good angle on it. I just wasn't entirely sure. I think it's
Exactly.
probably one of those ones. If it's
Yep.
given against you, you're raging. But actually, when you take a step back, you're like, ah, yeah, probably it's a penalty. Yeah, that lad. Where he ends up will remain to be seen. I don't think it'll be at Glentoran. Obviously, he's loaned from Lincoln. Obviously, if Lincoln were to, for example, get into the championship, I think that's probably a level above him. But certainly, I can see that boy forging a decent career in somewhere like a League One. To be fair.
Big time. He's got it all. And I'll say this: we weren't quite sure if he was going to play because of just how his game against Larne ended the Friday before. But there's plenty of people who were singing the praises of Marcus Keane there at the back. Experience had all that endeavour, and ultimately just ran out of steam.
Yeah, look, I think, like as they say, I mean, it's. I'm saying this through gritted teeth, but I do have a degree of sympathy for Glentoran in that I've always said, and I've said this whether I've been working at Linfield or not. I've always said it publicly, like the Irish League needs a strong Glentoran and needs a strong Linfield. And yesterday, although I kind of felt, and I don't know what the sort of listeners thought, the atmosphere was a little bit flat. I don't know whether it was the weather or I just thought it wasn't. Boxing Day to me felt more kind of I don't know, maybe raucous. Again, maybe no one's working on the 27th of December, and a lot of people working today, so maybe there's more people taking it easy. But in terms of the atmosphere, like it wasn't a great game of football overall, let's be honest. But I think that people like Marcus Keane will probably look back in their careers with a high level of frustration because, I certainly don't think Glentoran have achieved anywhere near what they could and should have done in recent years.
They've put themselves in a nice place, and if you're talking here 10 days ago, the treble was on, and it's not any longer just because they haven't been able to execute. And you go back to feeling frustrated, albeit you can go through every decision and go, that's just the way it goes. I mean, penalties, red cards, they've been they've been unable to catch a break here, have the men from East Belfast.
It's not for me to say, but it feels to me like they're always Glentoran just seem to live on the edge. I mean, if you remember the car park protest with McDermott, and it feels that obviously they had Warren Feeney there, who I don't really give the impression that he really wanted to be there. And the fans, I think, made it clear they didn't want it to be there either. But in reality, they just see there's something just missing there because when you look at that squad, that's the strongest squad in the league, in my opinion. Um, and I just thought yesterday where they just every time you sort of thought they're going to take the handbrake off, they just maybe it was down to Linfield's game plan and things, but certainly I don't think they fulfilled their potential. It's fair to say.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I'll say this. Look, it's a big occasion. I don't really know if the changes, or at least the players who came on for Glentoran, really either made the difference that they needed to, or even were able to perform at the similar level to the players that they were coming on for. Alternatively, can you still believe Mulgrew's coming on in a cup final at age 39? But of the moments, I mean, there was a tackle in the box late on that he made that I felt like only he could make, because he's been there, done that, and he had the precision and the bottle to do it. Because it was moments like that, big tackles like that, which I think will end up being the difference, and was the difference on Sunday.
Well, look, I always like to joke with Jamie Mulgrew. My birthday's the 19th of June, his is something the 7th, so I've always made the point that he is even older than me and still playing Irish League football, so we're both obviously turning 40 in June. He obviously has won slightly more medals than I have, but that's a story for another day. Obviously, I think in a way, and look, I've said this to Jamie, so I'm not saying anything that I wouldn't say to him directly, and that Jamie, in my view, is still like I was actually maybe he's not 100% fit, but I was actually surprised in a way. I thought he would have started Jamie yesterday just on the basis that I knew Linfield were going to try to stay in the game as long as we could. And I thought, you know what? You play Jamie for an hour, then you bring on an Archer or you bring on a Baird with a bit more legs. But obviously, David Healy decided they're supposed to do it the other way around.
To see it out,
What I
even
would,
if it was to get the penalties,
yeah,
or
yeah. Now, what I would say about Jamie is, and I've said this to him, the fact that Jamie Mulgrew at his age is still an integral part of the squad speaks volumes for him and everything he's done for Linfield, and his legendary status is cemented forevermore. But I would also say it probably shows uh, a weakness in the Linfield model where, with respect, like Tommy Ballantyne's been, at Linfield for 2 years. He's barely kicked the ball. Again, every time someone like Josh Archer, who I thought was very good yesterday, every time I think someone like Josh is going to step up, step through, he doesn't. But in a way, as long as Jamie Mulgrew wants to continue playing, I would be giving Jamie another year. And the reason I'd be giving him another year is based on the fact that I think his influence off the pitch is vital. I think that he still trains really well, and if he wants to keep going, I would keep using him, especially where Chris Shields will be coming back. Hopefully, you know, start of next season. Obviously he'll be older as well. I think it's really important to have that experience around the club and around a young team.
would you also be offering Fitzpatrick a deal, even if it meant he wasn't full time anymore?
Well, yeah, look, that's really difficult one, isn't it, Peter? Because if you know, I think it's going to be it would be very difficult to manage because how could you do that? Because in reality, like let's just hypothecate that Linfield made the group stages, for example. Okay, now I think that's going to be a stretch given I'm not saying that it's impossible for Linfield to win the league, and it's far from it. It's very, very much possible. I'm sure we'll talk about that in more detail. But I think you have to probably win the league to get to the group stages of Europe. I think it's probably the only way for an Irish League club. But if the likes of that situation were to come about, I think you know. I know David Jeffrey mentioned it in his article, and I agree with 99% of what David writes, but I didn't agree with that percent where I just don't see how you can manage Fitzy if he's not training with the rest of the team. I think it's an impossible situation. Ultimately, I think if Fitzy has to go back to teaching, you're going to have Ballymena or Glenavon or someone's going to throw a lot of money at him, and I think he'll do very well out of it. He will be very difficult to replace if he goes. That is for sure.
Talking about people swapping Linfield blue for potentially sky blue. Interview after the game with the man who scored the penalty, Chris McKee. He wasn't to be drawn on that question. That's kind of telling, isn't it?
I didn't see that. You'll need to elaborate on that because I didn't see the.
Well, he was asked, going, lots of chat around your future, and he pretty much said, can't really talk about that.
Yeah, well, look, I think like ultimately he's going to Ballymena. I think that's a pretty well known fact. I know that Ballymena obviously are clear with both him and Charlie Allen that that they are not announcing anything until the end of the season. But I think like everyone's well aware of what's going on.
Why hasn't it worked out for McKee? Because he seems like the type of player Linfield would want to come in and become the leading striker, but it never worked out.
Um, I wouldn't say, Peter, it didn't work out. What I would say is that Christopher probably fell into a Oh, a difficult space where he he is a very capable footballer in the final third, where he probably started his career more as a nine, as a kind of a poacher. Um, he maybe doesn't have the out and out kind of like pace for that. Um, he obviously has played sort of the wide 10 role. Probably his best role's probably been in the sort of the hole. I I think Chris McKee's a really good footballer. I think it's just that he almost fell into the trap of being the first sub. So, we're 0-0 after an hour, throw Chris McKee on. We're chasing the game, throw Chris McKee on. And I think he sort of found it hard to kind of get a nailed down starting place. I think obviously, Ballymena presumably sort of said, look, you'll start for us every week. I don't think Chris McKee's going to Ballymena to see out his days. I think Chris McKee wants to go play as much football as possible on the basis of then perhaps ending up back at Linfield, or going to Alarn, or whatever the case may be, Korean. So I think it's just more for me. Linfield are in a very difficult position when it comes to their finances, because they they have a lot of players who are either in contract for next year on the basis of a decent 11 in contract, but beyond that, there's not a huge amount of others. And I think Chris McKee's probably one of those players where Linfield probably, and probably Charlie Allen as well, weren't probably able, or maybe weren't prepared to commit to giving them another 2-year deal. Because, like, look, there's board members at Linfield who are quite open about this, and I actually don't disagree with them entirely on it. Where, if Linfield don't win the league for probably 2 years, they've no other option to go back to part time unless they bring an outside investment. So, someone like Chris McKee may have just been not a risk, but may have just been one step too far, or too soon, I should say.
Well, there's plenty of people, you talked about the idea of Mulgrew sticking around. Is that really a good thing for Linfield if they're striving to be the best club in this country on this island? And you might say, what have we seen from McKee and Allen to the point where you just can't give them deals based on the hope that they are going to take this performance to the next level. So perhaps you just have to go, right, here's the deal, or maybe we just need to freshen things up. You need to get a new place and we just need to try something else. Keeping on the theme of strikers, it feels like a bit of a mistake, does it not, on Tuesday night to play Offord? He came on at halftime against Portadown. He was off within 10, 12 minutes, and more surgery now comes his way.
Yeah, look, I mean, again, it's easy to say hindsight's a wonderful thing. Like, at some point, whether he was being rushed back for the cup final or not, I don't know. Um, what I would say is that he has struggled with that. That was quite a significant injury. He was out for some time. He's going to have to come back at some point, and yeah, he's just had no luck. And I think as well, though, like, there's a wider point where you're saying about, like, being the best in the island. One of the things that I was quite vocal about in the time when I was at Linfield was, you can go full time, as in you can pay players a bit more, and you can say, right, we're going to train during the day. That's brilliant. But you know the infrastructure around the first team also has to be improved. And I think that the performance element in terms of the medical structure isn't there at Linfield. And to be honest, I don't know if it's there necessarily at any Irish League club. I know, sort of speaking to Corey in there, maybe getting things going in that direction. But there's a lot more to going full time than basically paying boys a bit more, and that being seen as their main job or their only source of income.
But when we're looking at an Irish League going into the season 26, 27 in a couple of months, like, what is a full-time wage? Because you could look at it very easily as £600, but by all accounts, a lot of teams are firing that out. It's almost a case of full-time teams. Should that not be for the players who want to take things to the next level? Like, it's a hard thing to balance because, like, a couple of players who will be available this summer, regardless if you're full-time or part-time, the ones at the absolute top tier are going to be getting far more than 600-700 across the board.
Well, look, I mean, You're right. It depends what. I suppose this is a political question in a sense of like what is a full-time wage, and when you're looking at anyone getting paid in the Irish League, like it's fair to say, knowing a bit about wages, um, there will be academy players at Rangers who will be paid more than any Irish League player per week. So
But if your ambition, my point is, if your ambition is that you're 21 and you want to be a full time footballer and you don't want to go into anything else and you want to go somewhere so you can earn multiple thousands a week, if all that matters is just paying your bills and being a full time footballer, six, £700 a week is a very good professional wage.
it,
But it muddies the water when you can go, I'm going to have a career and also earn money in football. That's what's slightly muddying it. Where if you are a great player at Linfield, most other teams are going to offer you four figures, are they not?
well, yeah, I mean, look, that's the reality. So I think the point is where we are now in, I suppose, a hybrid model, a kind of a transition era, if you want to call it that, where Coleraine and Lorne have very much like stuck the flag into the ground and said, look, here's our position, and we're not moving from it. Which is we're going full time. We're paying for an infrastructure around the first team. We're going to. Yes, we're going to pay good wages, but we're going to create a good player experience and environment. We're also going to look at the academy and build up the whole wider squad club structure. Glentoran seem to kind of have struggled maybe to do that to the same extent. And I think Linfield have ended up sort of half pregnant, where yes, they're paying a bit more wages, but in the same sentence, they're probably still living off, well, we're Linfield and we can kind of get away with things because, ultimately you've got to bear in mind, it really wasn't very long ago that players came in on the Monday after the season was over to meet, David Jeffrey in the boardroom, basically being told, you know, yeah, you're getting another year. You aren't, and that was the reality. I mean, I think someone like Billy Joe Burns was probably one of the first players to actually turn down Linfield's offer because he was going to get more money at Crusaders. Now, you're right now where, if you can get, and I know for a fact that you can get pretty much the same money at a part-time club as you can at a full-time club in the Irish League. Okay, so I'm not going to name names, but that's a fact. If you
Yes.
then throw in whatever you do, so if you're a teacher like someone like Fitzy, you're laughing because you're going to earn really good money. For goodness sake, if you do little to nothing else, you're still going to be earning good money. Where I think the challenge is the culture where actually, if you were 19, 20, in fact, I was speaking to a young lad today who's finishing school and he's at Larne, and he was making the point that actually, the more games you could play in the Irish League at a young age, like Stuart Dallas, like Trey Hume, Paul Smith, you then actually have an opportunity to go across the water better equipped than maybe you did or do when you're 16. But I think that all comes down as well to the mentality. And I think you're right. Without putting words in your mouth, what you're probably asking is this current model actually creating, um, I suppose, a lower quality by default? And what I mean by that is that certain players can go, right, well, if I can get paid that for going to a team that's going to end up seventh, eighth, or ninth, you know, why would I go to someone that might end up, third, fourth, or fifth? Because, ultimately I'm going to get paid the same, and in a way it might be an easier life. But again, I can argue against that and say, well, the better players, Charlie Allen and Chris McKee are going to make Ballymena a better team, aren't they? So, they're going to make them a better team, which is going to add to the whole experience. For people watching the Irish League, etc., etc., etc. So, look, proof of the pudding's in the eating, really.
It's it is. I just wonder when we're looking at models and we've now started to feel out what this full time model for some teams in the Irish League is. The net result so far has been higher wages across the board, which is from a player's point of view absolutely a great thing. And then you've seen professionalism at some clubs, and the idea was that some of the top clubs in the Irish League 10, 15 years ago were the only ones that were drawing in crowds, having success, that they could pay these top wages. Now, the teams that are paying these big bucks that you and I are alluding to, is it sustainable? We don't know. And to be honest, fingers in ears, la 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 la, don't want to know for now. But there is, putting on your GM hat, there is a model where you are, because where Northern Ireland fits in the world football pyramid is kind of unknown. But there is a way where your model for success is excellent facilities, real focus on training, and, as you said, medical. But the players there are focused on being the next full-time players beyond the Irish League, and you might even say to get big money in League of Ireland or beyond, right? But as I put there, you want to be a professional footballer, and whatever it is, £600-700 a week is what will do you. And how that model works, we don't know. But the problem that I feel like Linfield keep talking about when they're saying, oh yeah, we're getting whatever it is, 2,000 in on average to home games, but it's unsustainable because all these other teams are now jacking up the price of players, and it's, can Linfield just stir them out and go, this is the price that we will pay, with the idea that you get to be full-time and you're on a better platform to potentially go on and be something else. Because there's plenty of young men who are full-time at Linfield who are there because they feel as though they can take their career to the next level. Are they not? Otherwise they go, you know what, I'll take my 100 quid more in Team 9 and I'll start that career that I probably need to do because my football career isn't going to give me the big bucks that I thought I would. Because even if, let's say, it's £1,000 a week, what happens once you hit 33?
Well, I think that Linfield is actually a bad example of this, Peter, and the reason I think that is because um, the level of expectation that I alluded to at the beginning of the podcast creates a situation where you have it's hard to bleed young players. Like, got to bear in mind, Trey Hume went on loan to Ballymena. Like, it wasn't as if Trey Hume come in and hit the ground running. He had to do it the very, very hard way, and to go from essentially Ballymena United, Linfield to the Premier League, was I mean, it's not an easy task, and thus why I think he is such a, an inspiration for young lads in the Irish League. What I would say is that, in reality, what you're doing is you're trying to create a situation where you want young, hungry players, but it's very difficult to get those young, hungry players if they haven't fallen into two categories. Either one, harsh stereotype, deemed not good enough to get across the water, therefore trying to keep them hungry enough and motivated enough to, do Trey Hume, Gareth McCauley, Stuart Dallas, to say you can play for Northern Ireland, even if you're playing for in the Irish League at 19 or 20. Or two, coming back the other way, where they've gone at 16 to Rangers, West Ham, whoever, Wolves, and then they come back, and then in their mind they've been deemed again not good enough, and that's a mentality shift. And I think where the real challenge is that I think Shane Lavery, am I right in saying,
I was just
is
going to say, is Shane Lavery not the
yeah,
archetype?
but Shane Lavery, I mean, and listen, tell me, listeners, if I've got this wrong. Shane Lavery, I think, is the only one who's gone. I think he went to Everton, didn't work out, came back, then went again. Whilst that's not an easy task, and I think you're right. The big difficulty that you've got now is, I mean, are we saying the Irish League is, a feeder to other leagues, or are we saying it is, the sort of pinnacle of your career? Because I think in a way you can very quickly fall into like the home comforts as well. Because like I'm convinced, and listen, he's a mate of mine, so I would say this, but like, I'm convinced that like Ben Hall could play in for a, you know, bottom end of the SPFL, top end of the Scottish Championship, no problem. I put Ethan McGee into that. Probably not so much now. He's got a bit older, but probably would have put Kirk Miller into that. Kyle McLean obviously had a bad ACL, but you can, there's half a dozen names that'll run off the tongue from like Linfield alone, and certainly across the Irish League, that for whatever reason, Conor McMenamin's gone to St Mirren, has sort of worked out, maybe not, but like in reality, you put your head down, you take your chance. Surely there's opportunities out there. And that was why I was so disappointed when Matthew Clark came back after a year, because Matthew Clark could have played for Livingston in the Scottish Premiership.
But the Irish League's always had that. in a sense that we've always had, like, you even might take a player, I don't know if he did actually do anything in England, but you gotta admit, if he took the jump and someone took a jump, took a bit on him, Coates probably could have done that. Waterworth, if he wanted to go back again, probably could have done it at some sort of level. Like, there was players like that. But it's difficult. And again, there's maybe players who are playing for Bodo Glimt who could sneak into Premier League, whatever. We always fit in to the pyramid somewhere, but we're always going to compare ourselves to the League of Ireland, where they are taking those steps up. The youth players are now being bought for millions, not multiple millions, but we're getting to that category now, and it's only because of the setup and the players that they can attract. So we're still feeling it out. You're right. There's plenty of people who are Irish League lifers, and then there's the youth players that have just all of a sudden 8 years have gone by, and this is their level. So look, it's a difficult thing, and it's all the business of football, and the model could very much change in 5 years. We don't know, but at Linfield, they've got the first proper big trophy, and you got to give Niffle credit. We do this every year, but this League Cup is an event. It's a day, and it's bigger than it ever was.
Yeah, and I think as well that you've got to bear in mind that the route now to being in the playoff final is there for Linfield, where they're guaranteed that. Now, look, Peter, listeners, you'll be able to explain this to me. So, Linfield now fall out of the playoff route. Is that right? So
So if you
essentially,
come first, great. Second, you're guaranteed. You're
yes,
guaranteed Europe. But pretty much, if you finish third, or
yeah,
fourth,
yeah,
and let's say third, for example, but the Irish Cup's won by a non-European Cliftonville, Dungannon, right? Then
yeah,
you automatically will get into the final. But in that same scenario, if you finish fourth and Cliftonville don't, win the Irish Cup or whatever, and whoever's third is third, that means you will automatically still get to the final. So that's the benefit, where it helps the fact if you finish third or fourth or even fifth, you're still going to be in the final of Europe. However, you're still pushing for second.
yes, yeah. I think that yeah. I've just actually sat and tried to work out the permutations of the split, where they've announced 1v2, 3v4, etc.
Yes, this is
today.
the fun. This is the
Um,
fun part. But yeah, it means there's a situation where Linfield, perhaps it might not go this way, that second ain't gonna be your bag. So, and third isn't gonna give you Europe. So let's just prepare however we would like to, because we are going to be in a final no matter what.
yeah, 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 yeah. And that's huge, because there's actually then a chance. Am I right in saying that it could be Corey and Linfield in the final of that playoff,
Yes,
or Glentoran and
it
Linfield?
absolutely could be Coleraine or Glentoran, because if it's one of those teams finish second and Linfield don't either, yeah, it could go that way very easily. Now, I do think that whoever is highest in the table will get the home fixture on that. So if you drop all the way to seventh, which you won't, that means that whoever had the highest league ranking will. It's only a one-off game, right? So that's where the benefit of finishing third, you're absolutely guaranteed Windsor Park, and that's where the playoff will run through. But it is handy, especially when you just don't know how these next few weeks are going to go.
Mm. Because another question, and again, this is educational for all of us. What if Lorne win the double?
Then one, two, and three all get Europe.
Right. So actually, then uh, the likes of a Glentoran, if they weren't to win the league, would probably, and probably a Linfield actually for that matter, would actually a Lorne double would actually work.
If if you're to finish third, yeah.
Interesting. Yes, yes, very good.
So still, of course, plenty to play for. We talked about how unlucky Glentoran were in that final. You mentioned the atmosphere. How on earth is the first game between Linfield and Glentoran in a final in Donkeys? How is that not the highest attended League Cup final? It's still Glentoran against Cliftonville. Was it a bad day? Was it the feeling around both clubs are kind of weird? Was there boycotts because it's a Sunday? How did last year do 2,000 more than this year?
I don't know. One thing I wondered was, um, look, Mother's Day probably affected a lot of neutrals or people who only go to big games. So the kind of Boxing Day supporter,
Yeah.
of which, like, let's be honest, like Portadown have them. Every team have them that basically kind of just go to the big, That's why when Glenavon got to the Irish Cup final about 10 years ago, I mean, most of Lurgan was in the South Stand from memory. That's just sometimes the way. I remember actually a guy I worked with at the time saying, he hadn't been to a game at Glenavon for years, and he said basically, he said that I saw half the boys you went to school with, who, so you do elements of that. So you probably didn't get just as many fair weather supporters. Obviously the weather, like it was a grim, dark day, which probably put a few kind of walk ups off. I think as well. I don't know whether. Uh, Maybe there's just been a little bit of a sense amongst Linfield. Like Linfield fans do vote with their feet. Like the attendances have been very poor this year. You know, uh, Windsor Park is just not. I don't even think Windsor Park's a great atmosphere for an Northern Ireland game now anymore. The way it's been rebuilt. Never mind, you know, 2,000 people in a ground. On a cold, wet Saturday against Bangor. So, you've a lot of factors going in there. Look, it was still a really good crowd. I just didn't feel the atmosphere was just as like raucous as I would have expected. I don't know whether or not Linfield not getting the cup adds to that because the cup wasn't particularly well filled by Glentoran. Yeah, just not entirely sure if I'm honest. But look, it was still a good day out. It wasn't a great game of football, but ultimately, Linfield won and we all move on.
I can't believe you're not giving any credit to Niffle TV showing it around the world.
Yeah, well, look, there is Nick. Actually, I've actually totally forgot about that because the fact is of the matter, it was
There's,
on three. It
there's
was
three ways to
three
watch
ways
it.
to watch it. So you have it in Niffle TV, which I'd be really interested to find the numbers out on that. You then have it in the BBC, and then you have it in Sky. So like even small things, and look, no one I know did this, but say you've gone to the pub, right? Say you're a Glentoran fan, you're sitting in East Belfast, and you have a couple of beers, and you look out at the rain and go, do you know what? It's on the TV. In fact, actually, we have it. So there probably is a little bit of that as well, where people probably thought, you know what's on the TV, forget about it. So that could have affected what another. You said 2,000 down. That could have affected easily 1,000 people, easily.
Well, it wasn't just the Sunday game which took up all of our attention in the Irish League because there was some games in the league, and any other week this would have led the entire program. It would be pretty much a special on this. The unfortunate thing has happened to Crusaders in a week where they could have won two games and be 9 points off bottom. They are now sitting there on goal difference, yes, but the bottom has fallen out completely from this team, devoid of any momentum, and it's the team who are now above them in 11th who have got it all. Is that out of 4 games they've taken, what, 10 out of 12? This is what a turnaround for Glenavon. And look, they could trip up, slip in a banana, and they could still be playing championship football. There's so much talk already as if this is a completely done deal. But when the chips are down, Glenavon have been rising to the occasion, and away from home at Crusaders, it was in their hand. Both these games for the Cruise against, you might say they were unlucky against Cliftonville, last minute goal pretty much from Joe Gormley, but they haven't shown up. And I'm getting messages from Cruise fans now just beyond frustrated, feeling like the inevitable is now going to happen. Could you have foreseen the situation Cruise are in with, 6 games to go now at the start of the season?
Um, no, look, I think Crusaders, there is a lesson for every other club where it wasn't very long ago that, Crusaders were winning league titles. You know, Crusaders have a solid fan base. They've got their own social club. they've got a 4G pitch. They've obviously come into um, the stadia funding. They've knocked down that stand, etc. I don't understand how they are in the situation that they're in, but I think that you know the likes of a Cliftonville, the likes of a Linfield, will look over their shoulder and think, well, do you know what? Like, Crusaders, if it can happen, Crusaders, it can happen to any of us. And look, let's be honest, Portadown, won the league late 90s, been relegated. You know, since then, there's a lot of clubs who there's a lesson for them from Crusaders. And what I would say as well is that, looking at the situation they're in, they're going to have to stick with Declan Cadell, win, lose or draw at the end of this season. The very young squad, whether or not that squad can go down and come straight back up again, will remain to be seen. But look, they're a big, they're a big club in the league, and yeah, listen, it would be sad if they went down, but ultimately, in the same sentence, they are where they are through, their own making, as far as I can see.
What has went wrong? Like we talked about like earlier about my big highfalutin. We're gonna get all these young hungry players. You're gonna pay them nothing, and you're gonna sell them on for all the big bucks. Like it's not exactly what Crusaders have done, but they've moved on from that Baxter Ball physical experience, and they've tried to revolutionize by taking on these young players. Some of them, of course, have worked out with the Brydens and the Offords, and other times they perhaps haven't. And a part of that must have been cost cutting, of course. But to fall away from a regular top six team to now being bottom of the league with 6 games to go, maybe it is just that they've got the appointment wrong with Declan Cadell. But they seem now the favourites out of all the teams, because how are they going to pull this out with these games to go, especially that swing against Glenavon that they've had? Other teams will look at this and go, we need to keep the foot on. We can't just rely on the players that kept this up last season doing it again next season.
No, I look. They are trying to play football. You can see that there just is a total lack of quality. They seem to be shopping in the lower leagues of Scotland. And yes, that does find you Fraser Braden. Yes, that does find you a Kieran Offord. But I was at the game on Saturday. Thought that Glenavon fans were actually were brilliant. Really brought a good bit of atmosphere. I thought there was absolutely nothing in that game in the first half. Two sides devoid of quality. Probably the two standout players for me were Peter Campbell at Glenavon and Paul McGovern at Glenavon. Crusaders have little to nothing in terms of cutting edge. I mean, they are in free fall. I would be, I would be surprised if they even have enough to win a playoff. If they are to pip Glenavon, but if I was putting money on it now, I'd say Crusaders will go down. Glenavon will win their playoffs.
Is there a concern that maybe this is a team that's falling down a league? And of course, like they've got a great setup. You hear the youth team's brilliant, and they're still a massive name in a prime area in this country. But is there any sort of concern that this is the fall of Crusaders? Like they've been out of the top flight before. Let's be real about this, right? But it hasn't been for 20 years. Like, are they going to struggle there? We don't know if if they go down. But do you have any greater concern that their stay outside of the league, if they are to fall out of it, could be an extended one? Like, can they pick up the pieces? Like, you talked there about Declan Cadell being the man to look after things next season no matter what. Surely at any other club, maybe he would have been swapped out weeks, months ago.
Yeah, there's obviously a loyalty to him. Whether it's a blind loyalty or not remains to be seen. But like, well,
Now, there's no one that I'm going, oh, this person could be the manager to jump in. But, I'm starting to see that now online of like, should they have jumped earlier? Because here's Glenavon without a win. O'Connor comes in and he's galvanised this side with him and his backroom
yeah,
team.
and like the interesting thing was that like Paddy McLaughlin obviously came with like good credentials. Like yeah, you're right. It's interesting because you got to bear in mind, like, you're saying about clubs going down and being relegated in the 90s and stuff. Like, look at Bangor. Like, you
Yeah.
can start to free fall and you can go in one direction. And you're right, because of where they're situated, you know, they've got there's some really good academy players, those players. But ultimately, like academy players are great if they do one or two things. If you're sold for good money, big money, and that's all brilliant, or you can step up into the first team. But both of those are bloody hard things to do, and I just don't know. Like looking at them now, you can see teams that go down where you'd say, right, like I'm not yearning back to the days of if they had Jordan Owens and if they, even your big lad Lecky up front, and a team where there was I remember every time Jordan Owens come on against Linfield, you go, oh, here we go again. Crossfield ball, header. He's either going to score or assist one. And it happens so many bloody times, even though you'd have put your house on it happening. And there's nothing like that there now. There's nothing at Crusaders who say, well, if they go down, they can build it around him or him. Because there's no way Fraser Braden's going to be there next year either way. So, yeah, like, look, I mean, it'll remain to be seen. I think, yeah, if they do go down, I just don't know whether to stick with Cadell. I think they personally will because there is a loyalty there, but I think he would need to start next season really well.
You know what? You've nailed it. That's the concern. It's at this level at Irish League clubs, you have to have some form of identity. You have to have people who feel really connected to what this club is all about. And you can look at it and say that there's talent, and of course there's been players who have been there for a long time, and Tuffy and Forsyth and others like that. But are they really going to be there next year? Like, even have players who've come in and out of this team over the past few years, the Forsyth and Lloyd Anderson. Like, he seems like one of the players who've actually been there for more than a cup of coffee. Like, everyone else is either youth. Like, who is it that you build around if they go down? Like, if Glenavon were to go down, you could see that, yeah, quality players are going to go, but some of them are going to be there to fit around. For Crusaders, it could be everyone out and start again, and they're thinking, oh,
Yeah,
anybody from Carrick want to come our
yeah.
way, maybe try and help
This
us
is the
rebuild.
problem because I even noticed as well where when I was at the game on Saturday, you see situations where it's a little bit like Chelsea. Every time I go to watch Chelsea, I'm like, who's that? There's been half a dozen players I've never heard of, and I'd watched them about 3 weeks before. And like I was watching Crusaders the other day, being like, the lad is it Robbie Weir's the captain?
Yeah,
I
hasn't
was like,
played most of the season.
yeah, but I was like, is he not just like a squad player? I was like, see the cap. None of it. They just are like a team who, like, I remember bumping into Declan Cadell in the gym, and he had like a lot of the players with him, and I was like, "Oh, is this like the academy or whatever? You're taking them?" And he's like, "No, no, this is like these are first team boys," and they all like they looked all like young enough to be my like sons. And I was like, "This is a really, really young team." And any team that you've got to be a hell of a player to, not to quote Alan Hansen, but to win it with kids. Do you know what I mean?
And look, they moved on for a reason, but it just shows how big of a blow O'Rourke and Clark leaving at the point of the season that they did, because at least they would have a bit of experience. Now, they were really trying to hold everything together at times in games, but the midfield just is like tissue paper. It just everything goes through it. And yeah, look, nothing's signed, sealed, or delivered, but look, we've seen plenty of teams have a really poor season, and that's what crushes them.
Yeah.
I mean, Portadown, our team that had something like that. Ballymena almost went down. A couple of seasons ago, they were quite lucky to stay up. Newry looked sharp, down they went. Everyone seems to be going up, going down. And they flip it back to Glenavon. Like, people were talking about the idea if they stayed up, the Mournview Miracle. I mean, they're above 12th with a game before the split. Nobody saw this coming. And you're right. Like, are they some sort of magical top six squad because they added 3 or 4 players? No. But they've got attacking talent who are willing to fight for it. And with this never ending takeover, it's gone through. The third part went through. Like, by all accounts, it's happened now. If all the chat around this investment is true, I mean, next season looked like they were going to go down, have to rebuild, and it's really before they were going to be all guns blazing. It was going to take 2 or 3 seasons. They could start that next month if the next few games go right.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that the other thing that I think the other thing you would say is as well is whoever ends up in the playoff is going to have a very, very tough game because that's either going to be Anna or Limavady, if I'm right in saying.
Yeah,
So you know, like, listen, it's there's a long way to go.
massively. I mean, looking at the table, just the way things are, as we said there, now on goal difference, but a significant swing. That's the thing about a 3-0 win. It gives you three and takes three off them. 72 goals they've conceded this season, my goodness. In 12th, of course, Cruise, 25 points. Glenavon, 25 points. Bangor, who themselves haven't had a win in a number of games, like they are on 33 points, which, is 8 points and 6 games to go. But they will be desperate for this one more win somewhere because they'll sweat that if they go up against Glenavon and lose, that it's just way too close for comfort there. Ditto for Ballymena. They're on 33 points themselves, but helped a wee bit by that result against Carrick Rangers at home. I mean, they get a late draw against Portadown last week, thanks to a Portadown player forgetting to kick the ball away. But 2-1 is how it ended against Carrick. Just are able to push back and hold off a late charge from Carrick, and that then makes that the 8 rather than the 5 points. It's been a difficult start to his career in Ballymena for Oran Kearney, but those 4 points give them a bit of breathing room from the wrong part of the table.
Yeah, look, I think, look, for me, I think Oren Kearney has done the classic where he's inherited a squad which he clearly would like to change, but it's very difficult to change when players on contract. If they're then not being played, no one maybe wants them, or they're certainly not in as much of a demand. Um, so I think, like, he probably judge him this time next year, to be honest, Peter, in terms of where he can go. I think all really at this stage is they'll be trying to avoid the playoff and then basically start again for next season, really, won't they?
Yeah, pretty
Um,
much. But you knew that for a while ago, but the results were just going the wrong way time and time again. You thought they're in there, but that 3 points is big, and it's frustrating for Carrick because as much as it felt like it was a long stretch to get into sixth, and he's guaranteed their place in this European playoff. That's now gone. Dungannon are locked in. That's 6 points difference rather than three, and actually the goal difference would have suited Carrick Rangers. Results would have had to go the right way. They're in a decent position now from where they were because I felt they were very much in this zone of maybe finishing 11th and to be up there almost finishing 6th. I guess all the players came good at the right time. Maybe every team needs to get spanked, whatever it was, 6-7-0 at home.
yeah, look, I think as well it just shows the fine margins because
Yeah, big time.
there is now a clear kind of top six and bottom six, or certainly there's a clear kind of top four, and then sort of everyone else, if you want to put it that way.
And I think also I should say, as much as they lost themselves on Saturday, Cliftonville are also a top 6 team, something that wasn't absolutely nailed on a number of months ago. Like 3 wins on the bounce, pretty sweet. But what can be tetchy games between themselves and Coleraine. Coleraine get the 1-0 win, doing their best to maybe fumble the opportunity to claw some points back while other teams were otherwise engaged. And they miss a penalty, but they get the goal. Like, I thought a number of weeks ago, just based on the way they had been just slowly going through teams, that maybe Coleraine were building themselves up to have this like blow away end of the season. And you've got to feel as though if you're having some sort of power ranking, of course Larne are the team who are in charge of this title race. Of course they are. But Coleraine have got more 3 points from positions where it maybe could have went one way or the other than most of those top 4 teams.
Yeah, look, I think all four teams can still statistically win the league. We all know that. What I would say as well is cliche, but every game is now a cup final. For all of those teams. Obviously Glentoran have their extra game on Wednesday night. I think at home to Cliftonville. I think it's then Glentoran against Coleraine at the weekend. So they're two big fixtures this side of the split, and then I think come the split. Look, it's ultimately still anyone's, but you're probably still looking for me. Lorne have a strong squad and they have experience at winning the title. I have never thought Coleraine had the stomach for it, not this season at least. And as I say, I just think that Glentoran, if they've one bullet left in the magazine, they would shoot themselves in the foot with it. So, I'm not convinced they have the stomach to get across the line. And look, you never write off Linfield. I will be pleasantly shocked if Linfield are to win the league this year. But look, I think that yesterday will have been a really good boost for them, because actually there'll be a bit of, look, let's roll our sleeves up and finish the season well. Because I can tell you, after that Limavady game, everyone involved at Linfield, fan in and outside the club, we're all thinking, just make this season be over.
Loaded question here, but from a team building point of view, trying to get themselves up from perennial sixth placers to being maybe a title challenger, maybe not this season, but definitely the next one, and speaking with their wallet very much on the table. How have you ranked the way Coleraine have attacked this going full time, trying to be the big dogs? We've seen outside of Linfield now, Glentoran do it, Larne do it in their own way. The Coleraine one feels more akin to maybe the way the early Ali Poor Glentoran was. It's had its successes and it's maybe not so high points. It obviously is pretty nice when you have the money in the back end to go flop down a big massive contract to the best player in the league, is it not?
Oh yeah, look, don't get me wrong. Like, I would, anyone that is realistic about these matters will look at this season and say, look, next season would be the one where Coleraine will say, listen, we've had a year, we're going to stick with the manager, we're going to build something. From what I am hearing and seeing, Coleraine are doing things right off the pitch in terms of the structure around the first team that we alluded to, that maybe Linfield haven't done as well. I think it's probably
What
somewhere.
are you referring to? Are we referring to chicken curry or what?
No, I'm never checked it. Yeah, let's not go there. No, I'm more referring to the fact that the money that you spend to go full time. Yes, the majority of it will go on player wages, as it does in any football club, but also the wider structure around, the medical and performance side. Yes, and a serious point around diet, nutrition, around how much money is going into your academy. Look, it's not just a Linfield problem, but I think the amount of money that academies can generate you. Yet how much then clubs are essentially using their academies to feed the first team wage bill, rather than using the academies to rebuild the academy and make it stronger. So I think, I mean, as an outsider looking in, feels to me that Coleraine are somewhere between Larne and Glentoran in terms of what you referred to earlier.
And then just the final game of the weekend to look back upon, it wasn't one of those crazy ones between Larne and Dungannon, and it was a familiar name getting the goals for Larne. Pretty nice free kick. I mean, he's having these like cameos for Larne without really being in the full flow that we probably remember him being in seasons gone by. Will he ever reach that level? We'll have to see. But Andy Ryan, he's not a bad man to have on your roster.
I think Andy Ryan, for me, again, look, totally different player, totally different position, but a bit like the Ben Hall example earlier. Like, Andy Ryan for me is good enough to play for like St Mirren. That I just maybe there's reasons he's not there. He on his day is the most lethal striker in the league. The first year Lorne won the league, he was signed in January. I recall that season. Was that the season that they signed Andy Ryan and we signed Kyle Lafferty? Does that sound right?
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, but Andy Ryan came in, hit the ground running. Essentially, was the difference in winning the league. Obviously, he's come back from that injury as well. And yeah, listen, if Lorne are going on to win the league, he'll be a defining factor.
You referenced it earlier on. We have our split. Let's call it split. I always feel we talk about post split, but yeah, post split, whatever it is. We're in the split very, very soon. We've got a round of games happening this weekend as well as this week, and then it's the final 5 games, and they are split up like this because we've changed it every once in a while. The first match day, as we're calling it, match day 34. First is going against fifth, second against fourth, third against sixth. First and second do not play until the penultimate game of the season, where on the final day it will be first versus sixth, second versus third, fourth versus fifth. So if we're to use that based on how things are looking right now, Larne will be playing against Dungannon on the final day of the season. Cliftonville would then play Linfield, and Coleraine would face off against Glentoran. So that's what our final weekend will look like. Potentially, everything could change. Ditto for the bottom of the division, 11th versus 12th. That will be kind of a penultimate weekend game, which can obviously change things up or might not, which makes it difficult because then 7th and 12th, will the team in 7th be absolutely gunning for it, trying to get, lock in 7th, or will they be going, we've already secured 7th and 12th gets maybe an easier chance? We'll have to see. But like that far better, where first against second is held till almost the latest point possible.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the thing is as well, we get this into a situation where, you know, in Scotland, for example, first place, second, pretty early because it's generally going to be the Old Firm, and they don't want the Old Firm being sort of last game of the season. But I mean, let's be honest, that's probably going to be Larne versus Glentoran. Am I right in saying?
Well, because Coleraine go against Glentoran, and Glentoran have got 2 games to go here, it really could go either way. But yeah, I'm sure odds would tell you that's Glentoran.
Yeah, 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 yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see in terms of this weekend because actually, as I say, particularly when you look at the position of that Korean game, Glentoran, Linfield can Linfield leapfrog both potentially if things don't go well for Glentoran this week?
By the split, it would be yes, no, yeah. Hold on, no, there's no way that would happen
There's not.
because Coleraine play against Glentoran. Glentoran could lose against Cliftonville, and then somebody would have to get points, and Linfield are 3 points behind Glentoran. So no matter what, Linfield will not be second going into the split.
Right. Interesting.
So we still have some pre-split games to look forward to this week. You spoke about it there, Glentoran against Cliftonville on Wednesday, just because Glens need that few days break after Sunday. Will they be revitalised? Maybe Joe Thompson will be healthy. And then before we get on to Saturday's games, we have 2 games on Friday. Carrick against Linfield, Glenavon against Larne. Sticking just with Glentoran Cliftonville, like, they've got so many of these games now at home. 2 games before the split and are having a majority of the games post-split, then at home. It's kind of heads down, back to it, and just don't slip here against a team which, of course, your boys lost to only a few weeks ago.
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that's a banana skin for Glentoran. I don't think it's necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily. I mean, look, I think in reality, whoever goes on to win the league probably needs an almost perfect record. So I think if Glentoran are serious about winning the league, these 2 post-split games they've got to get maximum points from if they're going to go into the split with some momentum.
Because they're 5 points off Larne now.
Yeah.
Larne have got 70 points, Glens 65, 1 game behind them. They also have a game in hand on Coleraine, who are 1 point behind them, and Linfield, who are 3 points behind them, 62 and 64 points there. So a win would put them within striking distance of Larne.
Yeah,
In their hands, you could say.
yeah. I think that's a fair way to put it. And I think, ultimately, as I say, the likes of Coleraine and Linfield will be just trying to stay alive as long as they can.
Yeah. Who do you back then? Glentoran against Cliftonville. Like Cliftonville, their season, like it feels like they're just training themselves up for next year, really, at this point, and trying to keep healthy then to go for a similar run that they made last year to get to Europe.
Yeah,
Like Magilton's done a great job.
it's going to be a difficult one, isn't it? In terms of it's going to be a difficult one for Cliftonville. But it's how Glentoran react after Sunday, isn't it?
I think they've got no other way to do this bar maybe swap a few of the bodies out and maybe go for it early, because you see if they're like similar to that Carrick game a number of weeks ago where they needed like a late goal and the goalkeeper to throw it in from a Carrick point of view to get that win. Like I think Glentoran need to be like 1-0 up or 1 goal to the good going into half time, or it's just going to be a difficult outing for them. Like, yeah, a draw here or a loss here isn't totally putting them out of the running, but it just makes everything so much harder. Like, there's a situation where Larne are pretty much looking sweet before the split even starts.
Yeah. If things go, let's say Glentoran even draw those two games, and Lauren then win at the weekend, then Lauren will be starting to get into a really really sort of strong position, won't they?
Do you then on Friday night, do you fear Carrick going to their place, albeit they're just looking to pump up their points total going into their side of the split?
Look, I think it's somewhere that we struggled with Drew the last time that we were down there, and I think um like ultimately it's going to be one of those situations where Linfield just need to try to use yesterday to build some momentum. And again, it's a difficult game. It's a banana skin, but it starts now, doesn't it?
I think you will get there. I think you'll get the victory down there, just the way things have been going. Again, it's similar to that thing where actually maybe if you haven't got something late, that isn't something for you to panic about. Like if you were to give Lauren any game based on form, based on the way things have been going, Glenavon away isn't a bad one. Like they've taken points off Linfield, off Glentoran, off many other sides, and yeah, it's not vital that they get anything over Larne here, but like they're one of the most informed sides in the league at home. They'll believe they could beat
Yeah, well,
anybody.
it was interesting. I was standing with my mate at the game, who's a Glenavon fan, and I sort of said, you know, when they were 3-0 up, I was like, who have you got at the weekend? Sort of, buzzing. And he goes, oh, yeah, Lauren. And I was like, all right, okay. So, yeah, listen, it's a tough one. And it's probably one they're not expecting to get anything of. So when they're looking at the rest of the games, they've been looking at Saturday going, right, Crusaders, that's a 6-pointer. If they get anything out of the weekend, I'm sure they'll be delighted. But I don't think it'll be. It's not a game they're going to be targeting compared to the split games, is it?
No, but I think they'll go for this. I think they might have a nice wee crowd there off the back of the weekend at home Friday night. You never know. I'm going to go a draw here. I think it'd be 1-1, 2-2, and that could be maybe a slight crack in the doorway for all these other teams. Of course, they have to capitalise on it. And then you look to Saturday, Glentoran against Coleraine. I mean, Glentoran have had Colerane's number in Cup and League this season.
Oh yeah. Listen, there's no doubt about that, and I think that when you see as well, it's probably the two teams who both. Um, I'm not saying it flattered to the sea, but I think both teams, every time you think they're about to hit top gear, they seem to stick the brakes on for whatever reason and skid. So, you're right. That game is a draw written all over it, doesn't
It
it?
feels like it just with the way things have been going. But I can see either team maybe sneaking something late there. But yeah, I kind of think that is going to be a 1-1. Like, from a Portadown perspective? Do you look at that game between themselves, Crusaders, and think like we're not safe, but in turn maybe helping the crews do something against our not so friendly neighbours wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Like if you're going to lose to anybody, at least you're punishing your rivals across the
Yeah,
roundabouts.
although I always have a wider view in this to say that I think it's in the interests of both, Portadown and Glenavon to have both rivals in the same team, or
That's
the
your
same
GM
league.
hat there, thinking you're counting receipts and paper tickets, going, "Oh no, you
Well,
filled
yeah,
out our
yeah.
waste stand." Urgh.
Yeah, exactly,
So
exactly.
they need to bounce back. I mean, I didn't really talk too much about the Tuesday games, but I did take a trip down to your Windsor Park. Had a nice time with Mark McGuigan, who friend of the podcast. Sat with him, had a nice wee Tuesday, and obviously offered getting injured. Wasn't particularly nice from a blue perspective, but just where I was sitting, one of the more Irish League behaviour things that I had seen in a while. Put it on, go down to 10 men. And then I think Ben Quinn was the player who was coming on for Josh Ukek, who's got about to be subbed on. Ukek leaves the pitch, and then the fourth official says to Quinn, "You can't come on," after standing around for about 2 minutes because he had no shin pads on. And
All right.
and at that point, I mean, Linfield just seemed to refuse to let that ball go out of play. And I thought, you see, if Linfield score against this team who are down to 9 men because a player didn't have shin pads on, that is up there. Peak
Yeah, yeah,
Irish
yeah,
League
yeah.
behaviour, but it wasn't to be. You know what? I think that could go either way. I mean, a win puts Portadown on the beach almost. Crusaders are desperate. Down at Shamrock Park ain't that easy, and I think maybe
No.
that could be a 0-0 or a late 1-0 thanks to an aim and five, let's say overhead kick or something like that. Cliftonville, Ballymena. I mean, these games pre-split are starting to lose a tiny bit of momentum, knowing that Cliftonville are sweet and Ballymena are almost there. Eight
Yeah,
o'clock
and
kickoff. This one it must be about something else happened to Solitude earlier on that day. That's a different, Jared Lawler's weekend of football. This is a little sticking the toe in the
yeah,
water.
don't really look. I'm of the view, and this is a wider podcast. I'm conscious of the time, but of a wider podcast. But I have already said, and I've said this directly to Jared. If we are going to try as the Irish League to grow, then we've got to look at what our main uh, opponents are. So your main opponents, in my view, and this is me campaigning for fixture change. This is me saying let's go May to February. It's also about saying, look, we've got to think outside the box. So, if it is, for example, Spanish football, everyone get into Spanish football, 8 o'clock Sunday night, that was what you did. Is there times whether is it a Thursday night, is it a Saturday night, is it Saturday at 6 o'clock, whatever the case may be, Saturday 8 o'clock. Let's see if it helps attendance, as if it doesn't, whatever. But I do think that, I mean, look, I'm a traditionalist in many senses, but a Saturday at 3 o'clock is going out the window.
Well, just because you're on that point, Swifts against Bangor, I think just at Stymore Park, that's a Swifts victory there. Just to wrap all this up, just with that thought, do you think next year could be the year where we see properly a game week, or maybe a game week or two, where a bit like we have the Tuesday nights where all the games are happening on a Tuesday at 7:45? Could you see something similar happening next season on Friday nights?
Look, I think certainly that there needs to be some sort of difference in terms of what we are doing, as compared to you know other leagues. What can we stand out? What makes us stand out? How can we get ourselves, um, slightly different, etc. And I think as it stands, we're going to have to think of something. And I like that idea of the Linfield Glentoran game a few weeks ago at 6 o'clock Saturday night. I think everything needs to be built around fan experience. What can fans do before a game, during a game, after a game? And I think it also then is an onus on clubs to say, well, actually, what are you offering in terms of you know, the match day experience as a whole?
Do you think clubs in general? And, I know people get very angry when I compare these entities to Irish League teams, but do you think we are lacking massively behind compared to the Belfast Giants and Ulster Rugbies of this world?
Yeah, in a nutshell, we are. A lot of
Burritos and
that, like,
beers for everybody.
well, look, I think that we're, you're very your big difficulty that you've got, and again, this is a podcast in itself, but the days of which going to a game with like a shitty burger stand and maybe being able to get a beer or maybe not, are gone. And I think like
They feel
ultimately,
very real in 2026, David. I'm sorry
yeah,
to tell
yeah,
you.
they sadly are, but they are a thing of the past. I think that, for me, I'm not saying that you need to be going getting a Michelin star meal, but what I do think is if you're a club, whether you're in Linfield and you're in the city centre or close to the city centre, or whether you are a Ballymena United, you've got to offer something, whether it is a decent burger and a pint for a tenner, something to get people through the door, have a few drinks, have their mates with them, and really make it into, a cultural thing. And I think that's why even local sport, like local rugby clubs and stuff, people become involved in the clubs based on the fact of they can go and their whole Saturday's taken up by being in and around. And like ultimately, it's not a salubrious experience. It's something that works for them, and I think Irish League clubs need to get better at that.
David, you're right. We'll just nip this in the bud before we're sat here for another 2 hours chatting Irish League football. But look, great to have you on. Lots of things to sink our teeth into there. And look, you've got one trophy under your arm. It wouldn't be a bad way to end things if another one was to sneak under Mr. Healy's arm. But sure, we'll leave that as we await a massive couple of weeks in Irish League football.
Yeah, stranger things have happened. It's a pleasure to be on, and hopefully get on soon. And yeah, I was going to say I'll come on every time Linfield win a trophy, but I don't want to be on all the time, so I'll let someone else be on as well.
From Linfield despair to Linfield jubilation in just a couple of weeks. People are going to be laughing and all that. But thanks again, David. Until next time, I'll see you soon.
Pleasure. Thank you.
I think we covered it all there, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. David Graham making his first little swagger into the podcast. Fun to get into the nitty gritty of, management stuff. And of course, if you like that, we've got some mega podcasts on the way. Is there like 6, 7 still to go? Plenty of things to talk about. Some big episodes, which I always end the season with. So to make sure you miss none of it, get on the crazy train, enjoy it all. You gotta subscribe/follow to this podcast on whatever your player is, be it Apple Podcasts, be it Spotify. Go on to the Kick and Match main page on those and hit subscribe and follow. It's free, it's easy, and there's a bucket load of you here doing it. So be a part of the cool kids. You can also follow me on Instagram, Facebook, and or Twitter. Outside of that, was that a little bit of heat? Was that a little bit of sunshine I saw there today and yesterday? Maybe. Fingers crossed that continues. Because imagine playing football in the sun. Crazy. See you next week. Toodaloo.